So Reframe was developed to give people a biblical foundation of how God is renewing all of creation. So Q is really founded on the idea that the calling of the church is to renew culture, not just individuals. And Reframe sets that biblical foundation of why that's important and why that's a biblical mandate. So many of us have this vision of engaging culture, but often our gospel narrative doesn't really explain how God is redeeming everything. Many of us have what I might call sort of a true but narrow story, an incomplete story. And the story sort of is mainly orientated around my salvation and me going to heaven. And it doesn't really include anything about what my broader task is or why God made the world in the first place and why he's redeeming it. And so as we start to engage the world, we find that we're not really sure how our story fits into God's story, how our passions, our gifts, our work, all the different aspects of things that we're involved in. And so what Reframe does is it goes back to the beginning. It goes from Genesis through Israel, through Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and new creation to give us a sense of like, what's God's big story and how do I find my story in that? And how does it answer the questions of who is God? What does it mean to be human? What's my purpose in the world? And how we connect in sort of how we engage the world day to day. So Alistair McIntyre says, I only know what I am to do if I know what story or stories I'm in. Well, our doing is always changing, whether it's dealing with the newest technology, whether it's dealing with advances in medicine. And so we're always asking that question, what do I do about this? And so we need to ask ourselves this bigger question of like, what story or stories am I a part of? And that's where the Bible is this incredible story that has like this beginning, this middle and the end. And we sit somewhere between the middle and the end. And it's our job to sort of live authentically out of that story in the midst of a changing context. And so in that sense, the Bible is both like unchanging, but it always needs to be dynamically lived out by us for our current context. So I think God's a genius, right? So he puts all these amazing people in the church, right? Okay, like all this different talent, everyone's got different giftings, different perspectives, different personality types, and they're all in the church. And his idea is that then we'll be activated to be like his hands and feet in the world, bringing flourishing, right? And so what we're hoping is that Reframe acts as a catalyst for people to have new conversations about what does it mean to follow Jesus in the 21st century and in all the different aspects of my life, and that people would be encouraged, they would be envisioned, and they'd be confident that what they're doing day to day is part of God's calling and work for them. Yeah, so I think that we all struggle with sense of significance. Like, how is my life significant? It's difficult in the age of social media and so much connectivity to hearing about other people's stories that most of the time I think, you know, my church isn't that big enough or my career hasn't been that successful. And so it's difficult to find out like, what does a significant life look like? I think the beauty about the Bible and the biblical narrative, and we particularly find this in the Old Testament, is they're very ordinary people doing ordinary things. And most of the time, they're not succeeding very well. You take someone like Abraham, and he has these incredible friendship with God, but also these incredible sort of failures along the way. But the incredible story about the Bible is that everyone belongs, and that no one gets ejected out of the story, and that's how God works. He works with ordinary people every day to sort of bring his kingdom, and that is the narrative of the story. There's really no one in the world, no one in the biblical narrative that actually tried to set out to change the world. It's much more they were obedient and faithful to the things that God did with them, and through that ordinary obedience, they changed the world. The other reason that it's really important to be grounded in the biblical narrative is that often when we're trying to engage the world, we don't realize actually the way in which our assumptions have been shaped by the world. And so what we get when we dig into scripture is we get a real sense of what it means to be human, like what God's original purposes are for us. And I think that that's essential, that as we're trying to engage in trying to bring more life to address issues and problems, that actually we're starting from a place of looking at, who is God and what does it mean to be in the image of God, so that we're able to bring something that is new, that is fresh to a world that really needs it. And I think that comes from us, again, living in the narrative and really understanding that story about what it means to be human.